Hi, welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk, 888-589-8840. A couple of other items on Chris Christie. You know, we're being told that Chris Christie is the savior of the GOP. He's the template. He's the one you got to follow. He's the one you got to imitate. Well, it's interesting that he was asked 4 times by George Stephanopoulos on Sunday where he came out on amnesty, and he dodged the question 4 times. He was evasive every time George Stephanopoulos tried to pin him down. And remember, we saw that the American people are not for amnesty. I forget what the exact figures are. Let me see if I can go back and find those exact figures. But that's not where the American people are at. Let me see if I can get the exact number. Let's see. 54% of Americans oppose a path to citizenship. Only 32% support it. So by a 54 to 32% margin, the American people are right with us. That's not where we want to go. And Chris Christie can't give a straight answer to that question, which means, I mean, the only way you can parse that is he's for amnesty. Otherwise, he'd have no problem coming out and simply denying it. By the way, I've gotten pretty good reason to believe from D.C. insiders that John Boehner is going to spike that into bill. It is not going to get a vote on the floor. I've been concerned that he had not come out and said, look, I'm not going to bring this thing to the floor for a vote. But now I'm getting assurances from people that are in a position to know that, no, he's going to spike it. It's not even going to get to the floor for a vote. So assuming that information is accurate, then INDA is DOA in the House, as it should be. Now, let me grab a Chris Christie clip, I think from yesterday. Where is that one? It's where he's talking about Romney and Romney advisors. Where is that clip? Oh, is that an audio clip? Yeah, okay. Jeff's got an audio clip for me. Cut this up. This is Chris Christie talking. He was grilled about using the, it's A9 on my list. I've got a different list. Anyway, it's a Christie clip about taking advice from the Romney people because he was criticized by some of the Romney people. Here's what he had to say to George Stephanopoulos.
He says, there are people now surveying the sum and substance of what the team was finding. Newton told his colleagues, if Christie had been in the nomination fight against us, we would have destroyed him. He wouldn't be able to run for governor again. When you look below the surface, Newton said, it's not pretty. I know you think that all of these issues have been vetted, but a possible run for president brings a whole nother level of scrutiny. Are you prepared for that?
George, listen, first off, political advice from people who ran the Romney campaign is probably something nobody should really give a darn about. So let's start with that.
So that's Chris Christie. Finally said something with which I agree. I mean, it's amazing to me that so many people are still giving airtime to Romney advisors. Like these people have any idea what they are talking about. I mean, their guy lost an election that he should have won by hiding in the weeds on social issues, and they steered him to a defeat. And now we're stuck with all the horribles of a second Obama administration. So Chris Christie says, well, number one, I don't think those are the people we ought to be consulting for electoral advice. And then also with regard to whether Chris Christie is the guy, and it turns out, by the way, he did pay $46,000 to some former Romney strategist to help him with his election. So on the one hand, I shouldn't take advice from him. On the other hand, I'm going to pay him $46,000 to help me out. But there was a poll that was taken. Let me see if I can grab that. Politico had this on its website today. A poll was done comparing Chris Christie and Hillary Clinton for 2016, and Chris Christie was hosed in that poll 44 to 34. So much for Chris Christie being the great white hope of the GOP. He's 10 points down to Hillary Clinton right out of the gate. And the legislature in New Jersey, overwhelmingly Democrat, so he had no capacity to move electoral politics or the political balance of power in New Jersey whatsoever. People like him, but he wasn't able to persuade them to elect other Republicans to office. Well, let's grab a couple of phone calls. Let's go to Kyle, Little Rock, Arkansas. Kyle, welcome to Focal Point. What's on your mind?
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Yes, sir.
Just wanted to kind of follow up. I heard when you were talking about Patty Murray, for example, about the, that we're the extremists, those others are trying to save babies' lives after 20 weeks. And I just immediately went to my speed dial and hit Mark Fryer's office here in Little Rock, and called. And it's like I don't get why more Christians won't get involved and at least pick up the phone and call somebody, because just in the past couple of weeks, we've heard the good news with the Gap. I boycotted them for like 3 years, and I was glad to hear that now they're going to be one of the more pro-Christmas companies out there. So it gets the job done if Christians will just get involved. So, I wish you'd talk about that. I know you do a lot, but it's just, I don't understand why a Christian thinks they're not supposed to be involved at all when all this stuff is going on around us.
Yeah,
And, really appreciate you, Brian. Thanks for taking the call.
All right, you're welcome, Kyle. Thank you. I appreciate that. And a couple of reasons why Christians are not involved in politics. Number one, it's just controversial. And it's like people say you never should talk about religion and politics because they're so controversial. Well, so some Christians just, they were happy to talk about religion even though that's controversial, but they will use that excuse for not wanting to talk about or engage in politics. But the reality is that politics is controversial for exactly the same reason that religion is controversial, because it is about the things and the power and the authority of God. That's what a lot of Christians fail to understand, is that the reason that Christians ought to be involved in politics, the reason that we ought to be engaged in politics, concerned about politics, that we ought to care about politics, is that every politician, every bit of authority, political authority that he has and that he uses, he got from God. That's what Romans 13 tells us. There's no political authority anywhere on the face of the planet that did not come from God. Every bit of political authority in the world has been established by God. So then the question becomes, okay, some human being is going to be exercising the very power and authority of God himself. Somebody's going to be doing that. It's going to be a human being. They are going to be exercising delegated power, delegated authority that came from God. That's why we cannot afford to be unconcerned about that, because these people are using the power of God. They're using the authority of God to do what they do. It's not remotely right for Christians not to be concerned about that. So the question then becomes, this politician that's using this political power, is he using it to do things that are good in the sight of the Lord, or to do things that are evil in the sight of the Lord? That was the standard that the Old Testament prophets used. So it's controversial, but that's not a reason that we ought to avoid it. I don't believe. I think that's a reason we ought to engage, because it's controversial for the same reason the conversations about religion are controversial, because we are dealing with ultimate issues. That's why people care so much about these issues. That's why they're passionate about them, because we are dealing here with issues of ultimate importance. And if you're talking about the exercise of the authority and the power of God that affects every part of human life, then you are talking about ultimate issues, and Christians ought to be concerned. We're having a conversation about that with some people this morning, about how that's really the key to turning this culture around from a political standpoint. I mean, ultimately, we need revival. We know that. We pray about it. That's why we open every program in prayer. That's why we are so committed to prayer at AFA. But if we are going to reclaim our culture, it's going to involve changes in the political world, because these laws that are being made, whether it's sanctifying gay marriage or sanctifying abortion or prohibiting religious liberty, they affect every single American. I mean, you can't escape it. You can't get away from it. You can't just ignore it and hope it will go away. It just doesn't work like that. But we were talking this morning about the fact that there are enough evangelicals to control the outcome of every single election at every level in the United States of America. If all evangelicals were engaged, if they were registered to vote, if they were motivated to vote, if they were mobilized, if they were informed, evangelicals are a large enough block. We can't do it all by ourselves, but I'm saying we are a critical mass in every single election. There are always going to be a number of other people that are going to vote for the more conservative candidate. If all evangelicals turned out and they voted for the more conservative of the two candidates, we would control ladies and gentlemen, we would control the outcome of every single solitary election in the United States of America, all the way from the county librarian all the way up to the occupant of the White House. So last caller, it's a good point. We need to get Christians engaged and motivated and mobilized, and that's part of what we're doing here. It's trying to make sure that you have the information you need to be appropriately engaged in the political process. All right. Now, one other thing on the political, I'm going to turn to Obamacare at the bottom of the hour, and we'll continue to take your phone calls. I've had some caller software problems here with my computer, so I think we got that fixed. 888-589-8840 is the number to call. You know, in Chris Christie's election in New Jersey, and I completely forgot where I was going. Oh, no. Cuccinelli's election in Virginia. He was running for the governor of Virginia, and he wound up losing by 2.5 points. The polls had him down by double digits just a week or two out, and he only lost by 2.5 points. The gap was closing rapidly, and even Democrats admit that if that election had been held a week from now or be held today rather than last week, Cuccinelli would have won. And the reason the gap was closing was because of Obamacare. He was hanging Obamacare like an anvil around McAuliffe's neck, and it nearly took him to the bottom of the sea. And now we're looking at North Carolina. Kay Hagan is the incumbent there. She's a Democrat, and her lead over her potential opponents for Senate is completely vanished. She had a 15-point advantage in September. So we're talking a matter of a month, 6 weeks, which is a nanosecond in political matters. I mean, for this kind of dramatic turnaround, she's lost a 15-point lead, and now she's running head-to-head with virtually anybody that's brought up to run against her. When the polls ask, what about Kay Hagan against this guy? It's a dead heat. And in fact, the Tea Party guy, a guy by the name of Greg Brannon, he actually has a 1-point lead over her in these polls. And again, it is Obamacare. And that's why the Democrats, I mean, I'm telling you, ladies and gentlemen, they are spooked. They are panicked. They are running from Obamacare like scalded cats. In fact, I'll play a little Jay Leno soundbite on the other side of the break, kind of talking about the Democrats. We saw that with Mary Landrieu. She flies down to Louisiana with Obama on Air Force One, then gets as far away from him as she possibly can so nobody would take a picture of her standing next to the father of Obamacare. Focal Point, AFR Talk.